Oh boy. My apologies for being late. I am still catching up like crazy. Let me get the video in front of me. So I'm on the Kaddish journey, saying Kaddish for my mom. And hold on a second. Not being cooperative is my computer at this moment. So today I couldn't make the early minyan that I normally go to because I had a conflict. But I know that there is a Chabad shul, not like the kind of Chabad house where there's like one Chabad rabbi serving a community. This is a Chabad community here in LA in a kind of well-known shul called Levi Yitzhak, where they have lots of minyanim, right? Prayer services starting all morning long, early, middle, late. And I got there, so it should have been fine, and I could lead the services there. It's called davening from the Amud, right? Praying from the front, from the stand, as it were, and leading the service. And they allowed me to do that. But because we're in that week before Rosh Hashanah, there's also a set of prayers we do every morning called Slichos. Today was day 6 of Slichos, and you know, so if I had just there's 2 rooms there. If I'd gone to the right, I could have just joined a prayer service. I wouldn't have led the prayers, but I could have said my Kaddish. I would have been here an hour ago. But I went to the left. So I said, join us for Slichos. Okay, sir, we should do it. And took, oh my gosh, like 20 minutes for that minyan to come together. Then people left, and we were waiting again for the minyan. I apologize for being late. I was like, I got to teach a class. I got to go. But we're here. So it's great to be with you. Let us, let me get this up. Let us light up the darkness. Okay. I knew that this Kaddish journey, I'm saying for my mom, that my mom is joining me on, would take me to unexpected places. Today was definitely one of them. Let us blow the shofar in case you haven't heard the shofar yet today. All right, who is with us on a Friday? And again, my apologies for starting late. Sharon in New Jersey, Yehudit in South Carolina, Paula in Chicago, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bella in Florida, Paul in the Great Northwest, Shandor in the Bronx, Ande in Washington State, Charles in the Central Time Zone, John in Maine, Bill in Missouri, Troy in Arkansas, Cristo in Lubbock, right? Clarice in Mexico City, Lisa in Massachusetts, Yosef in Massachusetts, Paula says amen, Lewis in which is Karen in Northern California, people are being very forgiving, thank you, Marjorie in Georgia, welcome everybody, dedicating today's learning in memory of my mom, Babette Bat Yoel. May our learning today lift her even a little higher than she's already at the highest levels. She lived such a wonderful, giving life. All right, we caught up yesterday. So we only have to do one page today, and it is actually a short page. So we're in good shape. Where are we holding? Page 79, Ayin Tes. Here in Tractate Kesubos, the 15th volume of the Talmud. Page 79 finds us in chapter 8. And continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 8. So chapter 8, we're getting a little bit, into the thick of it, into the weeds, in terms of marriage contract law, like vis-a-vis contract law, right? So we're talking about property that a woman brings into her marriage. Does it remain hers? Does it become community property? At what time did she receive the property? Was it just hers all her life? Did she own it all her life? Was it given to her before she became betrothed, or between her betrothal and her marriage, or after her marriage? What if somebody said, I don't like your husband. I'm giving you the property, you and you alone. I don't want him to have any part of it. Is that permissible? What kinds of legal structure can they build in order to protect her property rights within the marriage? How do we establish that what's hers is hers and it stays hers? These are the questions that the sages are wrestling with in these pages. So here we go. We pick this up near the bottom of 78b. Our Mishnah number 1, further taught here in chapter 8 that Rabbi Shimon distinguishes between property that is known to the husband and property that is unknown to him, right? So when he betroths her or when he marries her, he has some kind of an expectation of what she's bringing into the marriage. Recall that we were just before this talking about a dowry and a woman bringing a dowry into the marriage. So if she owns property, is that like her dowry? You know, if he knows about this property, so the husband is expecting her to bring this into the marriage. But if he doesn't know about it, well, then he doesn't know about it. So what happens? What's the difference? So the Gemara asks, well, which properties are deemed known and which properties are deemed unknown to the husband? Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Hanina, said, property that is known. This is referring to land, which cannot be concealed. Everyone knows where the land is, and most people know who owns what parcels of land. So the husband knew that she would inherit it, for example. Let's say her father owned land, and she stood to inherit upon her father's death, some uncle's death. She stood to inherit land. And he married her with the intention of using its produce, right? So we have this idea of usufruct property, where the property remains hers, and if they divorce or he dies, she goes out of the marriage with that property. It's entirely hers. But during the time that they are married, the husband has the right to the produce of that land. So that's usufruct property. So he had the intention of using the produce of that property when she came into the marriage with this land, or that she stood to inherit such land. So property that is unknown, this is referring to movable property. And Rabbi Yochanan said both these, land, and those, movable property, those are both deemed known property according to Rabbi Yochanan. What is unknown? Properties in any case where she resides here and the property was bequeathed to her overseas. She received a deed to some land that is overseas. That the husband wouldn't know about. Since the husband did not consider this property when he was marrying her, the sale is binding after the fact, right? The idea is if it was unknown to the husband, he wasn't counting on it. He didn't marry her or betroth her relying on the fact that she had this property. So if she sold such property without consulting with him, the sale is valid after the fact. She wasn't supposed to do that. She shouldn't sell property while she's married without consulting with the husband because it affects him. But if she did sell it, it's a valid sale. Whereas if it was known to him and she sold it, it was not. So the Gemara comments, that opinion is also taught in a Baraisa. The Baraisa states, these are unknown properties. They are properties in any case where she resides here and the property was bequeathed to her overseas. Now the Gemara relates, there was a certain woman who was about to remarry after she was divorced or widowed, and she sought to distance the rights to her property from her future husband. She'd already been married once. She had problems. She wants to be an independent woman. And so she wants to make sure that the property she owns now, coming out of her first marriage, remains hers while she is in her second marriage. So what did she do? She therefore wrote a document stipulating that her property be given as a gift to her daughter before marriage. Ultimately, the daughter was married and then divorced. She wanted her daughter to return the property, and her daughter claimed that it was given to her as a gift. So this woman didn't want her property to become neither joint property of her and her husband, nor even that he should use the produce of it. She wanted to retain full control of that property and its produce. So what did she do? She sought to make a very friendly deal with somebody who she thought she could count on, her own daughter from the first marriage, and said, listen, I'm going to give you this land, okay? But really the reason I'm giving it to you is so that it is out of the reach of my second husband. But you and I understand, wink, wink, that it's not really a gift to you. It's for you to legally own it, and then you'll give it back to me later. But the daughter received the land. Hey, it's my land. Now it's my land. Sorry, Mom, I'm keeping it. And that seems to be what happened. Now we're on 79a. So now the mother's trying to get the land back from her daughter. The mother came before Rav Nachman for judgment. Rav Nachman tore up the document, accepting the mother's claim that she did not intend to transfer ownership of her property, that it was not a fully intentional gift to the daughter. It was rather a kind of legal mechanism to avoid allowing her second husband to have control over it. So Rav Nachman bought her argument. Rav Anan went before Mar Ukva, the exilarch, and said to him, "Let the master observe Nachman the farmer." Right? This is a sage, but now he's being insulted by another sage, and rather than being referred to as a sage, this guy's calling him a farmer, meaning you should just stick to farming, because this ruling that he made, tearing up the document by which the mother gave the gift to her daughter, and when Nachman tore that up, he made a faulty legal ruling according to Rav Anan. So Rav Anan is complaining to Mar Ukva, the head of the Jewish community in Bavel, about Nachman and his legal ruling. Right? Rav Anan was upset that Rav Nachman destroyed a legitimate document. Mar Ukva said to Rav Anan, "Tell me, please, what was the actual incident?" So Rav Anan said to Mar Ukva, "Well, this and this transpired." He filled him in all the details. Mar Ukva said to Rav Anan, "Are you saying that it was a document of evasion?" This is what Rav Hanilai Bar Idi said that Shmuel said. "I am an authority who issues rulings and have issued the following directive. If a document of evasion comes into my hand, I will tear it." Right? Meaning that the husband could have had a legitimate argument and said that this gift of the land to the daughter, which was only made to evade, this marriage law and inheritance law, it never should have been done in the first place. Therefore, the land was never properly given to the daughter, and that's why it should be torn up. If the husband came, he could grab the land. But now that the wife is just saying, "I want it back from my daughter because I never really intended to give it to her," this is why this situation, the wife is benefiting from the fact that this document of evasion was never a valid document. And Mar Ukva is backing up Nachman, and Rav Anan is being told, "No, you're wrong." So after seeing Rav Nachman tear the document, Rava said to Rav Nachman, "What is the reason for your actions? Is it that you assume that it was not a wholehearted gift because a person does not abandon his own interests and give a gift to others?" Right? So Rav is questioning Rav Nachman. It's not that it was a document of evasion. Is the reason that you said it was not a real gift to the daughter because the wife, this woman, gave up all her property to the daughter, right? And when you see somebody giving all their property to someone else, even to a child, we don't believe it's a real gift because somebody doesn't leave themselves a pauper, right? The wife, if she gave everything she owned to her daughter, we don't believe that that's a real gift because no one, even to a child, would give away everything. But as the Mishna, as the Gemara will continue, if she only gave away part of her holdings, then we would be much more prone to believe it. Right? Because a person does not abandon his own interests and give everything to others. Now, this applies only when it is given to others who are strangers, but to her daughter, a mother would give property wholeheartedly. Rav Nachman replied, "Even so, where her interests clash with those of her daughter, her own interests are preferable to her, and therefore she did not intend to waive her rights, even though it was a daughter." And so because she gave away everything, Rav Nachman said, no, it was not she never had the real intention to give everything to the daughter, so Rav Nachman tore up the deed. The Gemara raises an objection with regard to one who seeks to distance her property from her husband. How does she proceed? Meaning, what is the right way to create a legal structure that will protect the wife's property from coming into the domain of her husband? What does she do? She writes in a document of agreement, contract, that her property should be given to others who in turn agree not to acquire the property. So this document prevents her husband from gaining access to her property. This is the statement of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Sounds like a pretty legit authority, right? So it's like, I'm giving it to you on condition that you don't accept it. But it's a good enough gift that my husband can't get a hold of it. And somehow this works. And the rabbis say this solution is flawed. Sounds like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel lost this argument to the majority. They say the solution is flawed because if the recipient wishes, he can deceive her and retain the property by virtue of the valid document in his possession, meaning you're taking a risk. You're giving this to someone who's going to accept it as with a document that says it's his, and you're counting on them to remain friendly to you and that they'll give it back to you later. But you've given them full rights to that property and you're taking a big risk. So what the rabbis are saying is this is not a good mechanism for the wife to shield her property because she could end up losing it if she ends up working with an unscrupulous partner. And so that possibility that her partner might take it away from her cannot be avoided until she writes to him, right, this business partner that she's using to shield the property from her husband, until she writes to him in the document that the gift is granted from today and the gift is in effect only while I wish to give it. So now she's inserted a condition which allows her to get it back, right? Because she has the condition that you can only keep it while I want you to have it. And as soon as I don't want you to have it, I get it back, right? So now it's much more like a loan than a gift or a sale. So in that case, if the one to whom she gave it as a business partner comes to take possession of it, she can say that she no longer wants to give the gift and she can thereby invalidate that document. So the Gemara infers the reason she can ultimately retain her property is due to the fact that she wrote this to him. But if she did not include this condition that I can take it back at any time, then her business partner can keep the property even though she had discussed that he should give it back to her. She has to include the clause in this, document of evasion, basically, that she can take it back at any time. Now, Rabbi Zera, so Rabbi Zera said this is not difficult. As the ruling that the document of evasion is void, that's in a case where the document was written about all of the property. It's clearly a person does not give away all his property. And conversely, where the document of evasion works, it's where somebody's giving away only part of their property. Now, the Gemara raises a difficulty, and in the case where the document is invalid because all the property was included, if the purchaser does not acquire the property, the husband should acquire it. And Abaye said, the sages rendered this property given as a gift like property that is unknown to the husband. And this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in the Mishna that if she sold such property after her marriage, the sale is valid because the husband never knew about it. Therefore, the husband does not have access to that property. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 8. Here's Mishnah number 2. If money was bequeathed to a woman as an inheritance while she was married, land is acquired with it, and the husband consumes the produce of the land while the principal remains hers. Now, you'll see over and over again that when you're talking about property and how to deal with it, property and what is the optimum kind of property, land. It's called real property for a reason, right? So if she's going to inherit property that's going to remain hers, and the husband is going to have the use of it while they're married, meaning he has the rights to the produce of that land, but she retains the land for herself, that's the optimal situation. If instead of inheriting land, she inherits money, so then immediately that money should be used to purchase land. And then the husband will eat the produce of the land and she'll receive the land when she goes out of the marriage. And over again, they're going to say no matter what kind of inheritance she gets, it should be converted into land. You should own land. How the sages made it clear that if at all possible, you should own land. Okay. So with regard to and he consumes the produce of the land while the principal remains hers. If she inherited produce that is detached from the ground, it is considered like money. Therefore, land is acquired with it, and he consumes the produce of the land. With regard to produce that is attached to the ground, if she inherited produce that is attached to the ground, right? So, her, God forbid, very close relative of hers dies and leaves her all of the wheat in such and such a field, right? not the field. The field belongs to someone else, but the wheat that's growing in that field this year, she receives it. So that's produce that is attached to the ground at the current time, as opposed to wheat that's already been harvested. So with regard, if she inherits produce that is attached to the ground, Rabbi Meir says, one evaluates how much the land is worth with the produce and how much it is worth without the produce. And the difference between these sums is the surplus value that belongs to this woman. So land is then acquired with the surplus, and the husband consumes the produce. But the rabbis say that which is attached to the ground is his, as he is entitled to the produce from her property, and he may therefore eat from it. And that which is detached from the ground is hers, like all other money that belongs to the marriage. And land is acquired with it, and he consumes the produce. So interesting, if she inherits produce that is attached to the ground, Rabbi Meir would say, well, get a, an appraisal of the value of that produce that's attached to the ground, and then use that money to buy land, and then the husband can eat the produce of that. But the rabbis who overrule Rabbi Meir say, produce that's attached to the ground is the very definition of what a husband is entitled to from his wife's property during his lifetime while they're married. So if she inherits produce that is attached to the ground, what she inherited is his, because she had inherited that kind of property that a husband gets within a marriage. Rabbi Shimon says, in a case where his right is superior upon her entrance into the marriage, his right is inferior upon her exit if he divorces her. And conversely, in a case where his right is inferior when she comes into the marriage, his right is superior when she exits the marriage via divorce. And how so? With regard to produce that is attached to the ground. If she married while owning such produce, upon her entrance it is his, in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. But when they divorce, that produce becomes hers, as it is considered part of her property. But in the case of produce that is detached from the ground, when she comes into the marriage, it is hers. And if such produce is detached from the ground before their divorce, then upon her exit, it is his, as he was already entitled to all the produce of her property. That's Mishnah number 2. Here comes the Gemara. The Gemara observes that in the cases in the Mishnah where land is bought with the money that she inherits, it is obvious that if one spouse proposes acquiring land and the other proposes buying houses, that they must buy land because it is a more secure purchase, right? These days we just think of houses or buildings as real estate, but there's plenty of places on earth where you could just buy land, right? And land, according to the Gemara, is the most stable commodity. So if you have a choice between buying land and buying buildings, buy land. Now, if the decision is whether to buy houses or palm trees, they should acquire houses because that's real property. If the decision is between palm trees and other types of trees, they should buy palm trees, presumably because they produce dates that are always ready to be sold. If the decision is between regular trees or grapevines, they should purchase trees. And the principle is that they acquire that which lasts longer and will not deteriorate over time. That's why land is superior to buildings. Buildings will deteriorate. If the wife inherited a forest of hawthorn trees whose produce is inferior, or a fish pond, so their status is a matter of dispute. Some say they are considered like produce, and some say they are like the principle, as they do not replenish themselves, but eventually wear out. The principle of the matter is like this. Any tree or plant whose trunk renews itself and it grows again after it is cut, this is considered like produce. Whereas any tree or plant whose trunk does not renew itself is considered part of the principle. Right? I remember we once had a class in our house from Arturo Lomeli, the founder of Clase Azul Tequila. We used to make l'chaims. We should start doing that again when we had live shows. And Clase Azul Tequila is actually, almost all tequila is kosher, but Clase Azul even has a hechsher. It's a wonderful tequila. And he came to our house and he taught us about the making of tequila. So tequila is very different than wine, right? So wine comes from grapes from grapevines. Each year you pick the grapes and the grapevines keep growing. But tequila comes from, is it agave or mezcal? It's agave. At any point, it's like a type of cactus, succulent plant. And that plant, when you cut it, it grows for like 7 years. And then you uproot the whole plant, right? The whole plant dies in order for you to make tequila from it, and then they plant new ones again. They have seeds, they will plant new plants, but when you make tequila, you harvest the whole agave, cut off all the leaves, and then what's left in the middle looks like a pineapple, and they actually call it the piña, the pineapple. But that gets cut up, cooked, etc., made into tequila, right? So that plant would be like principal, whereas grapevines would be, grape, right, is considered like a trunk that renews itself after it's cut is like produce. Oh, right. Something that does not renew itself, that's considered like principal. Something that does renew itself, the cuttings from it are like produce. Rabbi Zera said that Rabbi Oshaya said that Rabbi Yanai said, and some say Rabbi Abba said that Rabbi Oshaya said that Rabbi Yanai said, one who steals, and now we're on 79b, the offspring of an animal, of a woman's usufruct property, must pay payment of double the principal to the woman. Apparently, this ruling is based on the assumption that the offspring is not treated as the produce of her property, but as the principal which belongs to the woman. Right? So if you have, imagine, you have a sheep, a female sheep, and it has lambs. Right? So the new lambs, are they considered like the produce of the mother sheep? Each year she'll have a few lambs, and the husband is entitled, to do whatever he wants with the lambs because those are like the produce of her principal property. Or do we say that even though the sheep will have a few baby sheep each year, a few lambs, that actually the new lambs just become like the growth of her property, and it's her principal that grows, and the husband does not have a right to take the lambs as the produce, right? Are the lambs like harvesting crops from a field that she owes? Or is it more like a bank account that grows, right? So the Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion was this law stated? That it's actually part of the principal and not the produce, the babies. So in accordance with whose opinion was the halakha stated, it is not in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, and it is not in accordance with that of Hananya. And the Gemara explains the dispute that they're talking about. As it is taught elsewhere in a baraisa, the offspring of a usufruct animal, right? So a usufruct animal means it's her property, but he's entitled to the produce of the animal. So for example, if she had dairy cows, so for sure the milk of those cows, the husband is entitled to the milk, but she retains ownership over the cows. But what about the calves that come from the cow? Are those like the milk, or are those like increasing the herd? How does it work? So the Gemara explains. It's taught in a baraisa, the offspring of a usufruct animal belongs to the husband. So the calves or the baby lambs, they would belong to the husband according to this view. Whereas the child of a usufruct maidservant belongs to the wife. So they're distinguishing between livestock and slaves, right? So back then they had slaves. And so a woman could bring a slave into a marriage, right? And the husband would be entitled to the labor of the slave, but the wife would retain ownership over the slave. And now we've just learned that the wife would retain ownership over the offspring, the children of that slave. Obviously, it's very difficult to our ear, but 2,000 years ago and 3,000 years ago when the Bible was written, slavery was just very common in the world. And actually the Torah came along and created rights for slaves that did not exist prior to the giving of the Torah. So whereas the wife is entitled to the children of the usufruct maidservant. So Hananiah, the son of Yoshia's brother, said, they made the status of the child of the usufruct maidservant, the slave, like that of the offspring of a usufruct animal, of the livestock. And both would belong to the husband. Now, both opinions in the Baraisa agree that the offspring of a usufruct animal belongs to the husband. Why then must the thief pay double payment to the woman, right? Why does he, if he steals and he has to make the thief's penalty, why does he owe that to the woman as if he stole her principal rather than owe it to the husband as if he stole his produce? So the Gemara answers, you can even say that all agree with Rabbi Yanai's ruling, as there is a difference between the general use of property and the double payment. And this is because the sages instituted for the husband to consume the produce, but the sages did not institute for him to consume the produce of the produce. So the double payment does not have the status of the offspring itself, but of produce resulting from its theft, which is considered the produce of the produce, and therefore it belongs to the wife. So the Gemara asks, granted, according to Hanania, who equates the law of a maidservant's child to that of an animal's offspring, this is because we are not concerned about the death of the mother. Therefore, the mother is the principal, while its offspring is considered the produce. But according to the rabbis, if they are concerned about the death of the mother, and this is why a maidservant's child belongs to the wife, even the offspring of a usufruct animal should not have the status of produce either. Rather, it should have the status of principal, because if the usufruct animal dies, the woman will be left with nothing, right? So it makes sense, according to this view, that let's say a woman comes into a marriage and she owns several cows. So the husband is entitled to the milk of the cows. What about the calves? You could say that the husband is entitled to the calves because the calves are like produce of the cows. But then you could say, well, wait a minute. If the mother cow dies, then this wife is left with nothing. So the calves should belong to her. Like increase of the herd is hers. The husband can keep eating, taking the milk as his property. Or if there's sheep, he would be entitled to the wool that is shorn from the sheep. Or the sheep's milk, but the sheep themselves and their babies should belong to the wife. If you're concerned that the livestock could die, this is a way to protect the property of the wife. And the Gemara answers, actually the rabbis are concerned about the death of the mother slave or the mother livestock, but the law of an animal is different, as there is still the hide, which does remain after death. So even if the sheep dies, the wife will at least get the sheep's skin. Whereas if a slave dies, the wife would be left with nothing. So Rav Huna Bar Chiya said that Shmuel said the law is in accordance with the opinion of Hanania, that the child of a maidservant belongs to the husband. Rava said that Rav Nachman said, although Shmuel said that the law is in accordance with the opinion of Hanania, Hanania concedes that if the woman was divorced, she pays money and takes the children of her maidservants because they are assets of her paternal family, and it is unfitting for the children of her family's slaves to belong to someone else. And there you get a little bit of insight into the way slavery was practiced back then. So, the slaves had a relationship with their families, right? And I'm sure that there were many cruel slave owners, but that was not the norm, right? The norm was that slaves were kind of members of the family. They just had labor to do within the family. And particularly when you're talking about Hebrew slaves, which are not inheritable, because they go out after 7 years, but a Hebrew slave could choose to become a permanent slave, and then he would be inheritable, as it were, by that slave owner's family. Rava said that Rav Nachman said if she brought into the marriage for him a goat for its milk, or a sheep for its shearings, or a hen for its eggs, these are all usufruct animals, or a palm tree for its produce. So the husband continues to consume the produce until the principal is consumed, and there is no concern that the woman will remain with nothing of value. Similarly, Rav Nachman said if she brought in for him a cloak as her usufruct property, it is produce, and he may cover himself with it until it is consumed. By the way, let's remember, why is the husband entitled to the produce of the wife's property, either the produce of a field that she owns, or the eggs or milk or shearings of the livestock that she owns? Why does the husband get the produce? Because he has an obligation to provide all of the wife's sustenance, right? He has to feed her, clothe her, shelter her, everything. And because he has that absolute obligation, the sage is decreed for him to receive the produce of her property. And so the Gemara comments, in accordance with whose opinion is this ruling? It is in accordance with this Tana, as it is taught in a Baraisa. If a wife's usufruct property includes a location on the shore from which salt and sand are extracted, this extract is deemed produce, not principal. As for a quarry of sulfur or a mine of alum, Rabbi Meir says these are deemed principal, as the mine contains a finite amount. It doesn't renew itself. And so therefore, anything that comes out of a mine is like principal, not like produce. It belongs to her. It doesn't belong to the husband. And the rabbis say extractions from such locations are produce, while the location of the mine is the principle, but the ore that comes out of the mine is actually produce that does belong to the husband. Now, the Mishna stated that Rabbi Shimon says in a case where his right is superior upon her entrance, his right is inferior upon her exit if he divorces her. And conversely, in a case where he has inferior rights when the marriage begins, he has superior rights when they divorce. And the Gemara asks, the statement of Rabbi Shimon is identical to that of the first Tana, the rabbis. Why then are both necessary? And Rava said, the practical difference between them is the status of produce that was attached at the time of her departure from the marriage. And the rabbis, who did not directly address this issue, maintain that it belongs to him, whereas Rabbi Shimon says it belongs to her. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2. Mishnah number 3, we're making good time, even though we started a little late. So I think what we'll do is we'll do Mishnah number 3 and its very short discussion, and then we'll knock off there and go to questions. So Mishnah number 3, if elderly slaves or maidservants were bequeathed to her, they are sold and land is acquired with them, and the husband consumes the produce of the land, right? Better land than slaves. Certainly than elderly slaves. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says she need not sell these slaves and maidservants because they are assets of her paternal family, and it would be shameful to the family if they were sold to others. Likewise, if old olive trees or grapevines were bequeathed to her, they are sold and land is acquired with them, and then the husband consumes the produce. And Rabbi Yehuda says she need not sell them because they are assets of her paternal family. So even though you would prefer to have land, in this case of elderly slaves or what kind of old olive trees or grapevines, where you might think it would be better to convert them into land, which is a stable investment, and the husband could eat the produce of that land. Here, where there's a kind of emotional attachment that affects the honor of her father's family, it's better for her to keep those elderly slaves as they are, and likewise with old olive trees or grapevines. That's Mishnah number 3 of chapter 8. Gemara. Rav Kahana said that Rav said, this dispute concerning olive trees and grapevines is referring to a case when they were bequeathed to her in her field, as they are assets of her paternal family, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda rules that she need not sell them. But if she received them in a field that is not hers, everyone agrees that she must sell them because the principal will be consumed. Since these trees will not yield much produce, old olive trees have a limited number of olives that they're going to yield, right? Their yield has started to decline. They're kind of on their way out of their life cycle. Olive trees are not forever. So it'd be better if she sold them and bought land with the proceeds. Rav Yosef objects to this. But elderly slaves and maidservants are considered like a field that is not hers, as nothing will remain of the principal. Elderly slaves who cannot have children, eventually they'll die, and they can do more no work, and she'll be left with nothing. As nothing will remain of the principal. And yet Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the first Tana disagree over this case. So the Gemara retracts. Rather, if the above statement of Rav Kahana was stated, it was stated like this. Rav Kahana said that Rav said, the dispute with regard to olive trees and vines is referring to when they are located in a field that is not hers. But if they're located in her field, everyone agrees that she need not sell them because they are assets of her paternal family. That's where we'll finish. I'll go to questions. We'll pick this up with page 80, God willing, after Shabbos ends tomorrow night. And then on Sunday, because Rosh Hashanah begins Sunday evening, it is my intent to have class at noon Pacific on Sunday, right? We'll do the Friday schedule on Sunday. So we'll do page 81 on Sunday at noon Pacific. Then no class Monday or Tuesday. I don't want to do a class like Tuesday night when we come out of Rosh Hashanah. That's just not going to work. So then we'll do a makeup, with 3 pages, possibly highlights of 3 pages on Wednesday. So, right, class, normal Shabbos night, Saturday night class tomorrow night, Sunday at noon, rather than 6 p.m. Pacific. No class Monday, Tuesday, and we'll resume Wednesday at 6. And then, we're going to have frequent interruptions during the holiday period. Rosh Hashanah, 2-day holiday, then 10 days to Yom Kippur, 1-day holiday, then 5 days to Sukkot. And then we'll have a 2-day holiday at the beginning of Sukkot, Shabbat within the middle of Sukkot, and then a 2-day holiday at the end of Sukkot. And then at that point, God willing, we're going to be going into pre-production on our movie, which is going to be of great interest to the accidental Talmudist community, a murder mystery thriller with a rabbi as a detective. But once we enter formal pre-production, my time is going to be 20 hours a day for the 3 months. And so there will be a hiatus at that time. But we're not there yet. All right, let's take questions or comments from today. On page 79. Yosef, if the majority usually wins out, do the minority opinions ever come out as law? Yes, they do. Yes, they do. But rarely, right? So, and that's why we should never make assumptions that's usually, right? When the rabbis say such and such, but Rabbi Meir says such and such, and it's one against the majority. Generally, the majority, the halacha is like them. However, it might be that conditions changed in the world or in the Jewish community or in Babylonia, and that later sages, who are still sages of the Talmud, sometimes even sages of the Mishna, would say, well, actually, it changed. The law changed, and here's why. And the law became established like a minority opinion. And that's why we never paskin halacha from the Gemara, right? We never read a law in the Gemara and say, okay, that's the law. Yeah, if you have a question of halacha, you have to go and check Shulchan Aruch or Mishna Torah or, just like look it up. What is the halacha on whatever kind of question? Because it might have changed later. And sometimes the halacha has changed much later. 1,000 years after the Talmudic period, or even more recently than that. And so that's why you have to check a contemporary halachic resource like Shulchan Aruch in order to establish what the law is. Sharon, how does the principle of owning land as paramount square with the underlying value of the Yovel, the Jubilee year? What a wonderful question. So Sharon is saying that in the Jubilee year, right, which comes at the end of 7 Shemitah cycles, right? So every 7 years, when the Jews have sovereignty over the land of Israel and the temple is standing. Now, some people are practicing Shemitah now, but it's kind of like an effort to bring Mashiach sooner. Some would say that that's not necessary, but a lot of farmers are trying to do it. It's very difficult, right? When God's presence is in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, then every 7 years, the farmers don't have to plant in Israel because there will be so much produce in the 6th year that they'll eat. Now, you do 7 cycles of 7 years, and then you have the Yovel, the Jubilee year, right? That's where the word Jubilee comes from. And in the 50th year, any sales of land that happen revert to the original ancestral land holdings as the land was distributed when Joshua led the nation of Israel into the Holy Land, and they apportioned all of the land by tribe, right? There was the area for the tribe of Yehuda, and that was subdivided according to all the families, and the area of Benjamin, and Dan and Naphtali, etc. So there's this idea that is implied by the Yovel that even though we don't practice this now so much, but there's this idea that you might be, you might have a deed to the land, but you don't really own it, right? That is a legal structure created by humans. But the land belongs to God, and we're reminded of that every 50 years when even, perfectly legal, valid sales of land revert to the original owner. And that's why in ancient Israel, when they would sell land, it was really selling it for the number of years left until the Yovel, right? So when they said that land was the paramount importance, either they were saying because it's the most stable, even though it will go out in the 50th year, or because certain kinds of land transfers did survive the Yovel. For example, within a walled city, right? The land that was distributed to the tribes was really the farm fields out beyond the walled cities. But the Levites, for example, they didn't get a discrete area of Israel for the Levite tribe. Their portion was God, and they would serve in the temple. And so they ended up living in cities. And the houses and apartments that you would buy in a city, those were permanent sales. And so there, you've got very stable real estate that doesn't go out in the 50th year. Alex, can you move a fruit tree on your property provided that you don't kill it? I don't know. I mean, that's just another body of law that we're not really dealing with here. I don't see why not. You want to always be very careful, but I mean, you have a right. Maybe what you're talking about is if she owns the tree and the husband is entitled to the produce of the tree, can he relocate the tree to a place where it will yield better produce? Given that in moving the tree, there's a risk, that the principle, the tree itself, would be damaged or lost, and that would be a very important consideration. It would be like a case-by-case basis, I think, and you'd have to consult your local Orthodox rabbi in that kind of a question. Tom, what if the father of the slave was a slave belonging to the husband? Well, I mean, that sounds like it's already his slaves. It's not something that she inherited, right? It was his slave, and so the offspring of those slaves remain his, right? So that's his property. But it's more like she owns slaves, and what about the children of her slaves that she inherited is where these questions come up. And finally, Julie, can you explain the Shemitah year every 7 years where the land is debt-free? I mean, Shemitah in modern times is like a very different construct than Shemitah in ancient times, right? So normally when we're studying Shemitah within, Talmudic law, we're studying the way it was intended to be lived. When the temple was standing and the whole system was built around an agricultural society focused on the temple, bringing the first of its produce every year, the first fruits to the temple, harvesting, tithing to the priests and the Levites, etc. Whatever version of that is being practiced today is a very different thing. But we still study the laws as they were practiced thousands of years ago because that's the ideal, and we believe that when the Messiah comes, we'll go back to that system, and if not, it'll be some version of the ancient system that our teacher, the Messiah, will explain to us how it's going to be run now, because one thing that will definitely happen when the Messiah comes, that the third temple will go up, and it'll go up built by God in one day, is what our tradition holds. And so the whole tithing system will return, and Shemitah will have a whole different meaning. But I am no kind of expert to be answering questions offhand, neither about modern Shemitah nor about ancient Shemitah as intended by the Torah. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night after Shabbos. And then Rosh Hashanah starts Sunday night. So I wish you, my friends, a good Shabbos filled with joy and simcha, music, health, and meaning, and a whole year, the coming year, 5783, I believe, that it should be a year of health, joy, meaning, prosperity, and good